Hi, and welcome to the How to Survive Healthcare podcast. I'm your host, Kayla Thompson-Riviere, seasoned critical care RN turned independent patient advocate. Tune in every week so that you can learn the things about the U.S. healthcare system that no one ever tells you. That way that you can get the most from it and optimize your health outcomes. Now, of course, this podcast is strictly to inform and entertain and should never be taken as a substitute for medical advice. Let's dive right in. Hey, welcome back to another episode of How to Survive Healthcare. Today, I want to talk to you about prediabetes. Have you heard of it before? I've even seen billboards about it because it is a huge public health epidemic here in the U.S. It's estimated about 1 in 3 adults has prediabetes, which, I mean, that's a staggering number. It's millions of people. And it's so insidious because prediabetes typically has 0 symptoms. So this is one of the reasons it's very important to go to your regular annual checkup every year and have your doctor do the blood work and check in on you. But what is the big deal with prediabetes? So prediabetes, as you may suggest or may infer, if left untreated, will progress to type 2 diabetes. What does that mean? So there's 2 ways, for the most part, that you get diabetes. Number 1, you're born with some sort of interference in the way the system normally works, and therefore you're a diabetic, and that's typically called type 1 diabetes. Usually the symptoms from that present early in childhood, though some people do get diagnosed later on if perhaps their symptoms just aren't as bad. But the majority of Americans today have type 2 diabetes. And unpopular opinion, type 2 diabetes, for the most part, occurs because of lifestyle. Now, before you come at me, yes, there are things that make you more at risk for diabetes. For instance, there is a little bit of a genetic component, though less than we've thought before. It is true that diabetes tends to run in families, but just because your family is diabetic doesn't mean that you will be. What researchers have found is actually it's not that diabetes runs in family because of the genes. It's that diabetes seems to run in families because they're all making the same poor lifestyle choices. Some people say, I've heard it put before, diabetes doesn't run in your family. Nobody runs in your family. And that's sort of a crude, comical way to look at it. But put pretty bluntly, that's often a big component of that. Now, we do see that diabetes does disproportionately affect people of color. They're not sure why, although we do know that people of color also tend to be disproportionately affected by food deserts and lack of resources in healthcare. So again, unclear if it's truly genetic or if it's more of an environmental issue or, again, affected by lifestyle choices. That being said, just because you carry a genetic predisposition for a condition doesn't mean that it's going to happen to you. So what does that mean? Genetic predisposition means there's something in your genes, in your DNA, in the coding instructions of every cell in your body that makes you more likely to develop a condition. Somebody with a genetic predisposition for a condition like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, they're more likely to develop that condition than somebody who doesn't have that predisposition. But that genetic more predisposition, it's kind of like a light switch, and your lifestyle choices determine whether that gets switched on or off. Again, this is not across the board, but for the most part. Now, that is a great thing because that puts the power back in your hands to control those lifestyle choices and keep that switch from getting flipped. So back to prediabetes, though. when you are pre-diabetic, it means that the levels that we're looking at, typically your glucose level, your fasting or random, and also your hemoglobin A1C. It means those levels are elevated above normal, but not yet to the level that we consider diabetes. So glucose is sugar, basically, okay? And that's what every single cell in your body uses for fuel. However, if you have too much glucose in your bloodstream, it will cause damage. And this is where we see, you've probably heard of diabetics that they end up having strokes, heart disease, kidney problems, neuropathy where they can't feel in their toes, feet, legs. All of that is because of the buildup of excess sugar in the bloodstream. Where does that excess sugar come from? Frankly, from the diet. Sugar is a big molecule. As I mentioned, every cell in the body runs on it. So it's kind of like the gasoline you put in your car. It's required, but only at certain amounts. It's a very large molecule and it can't get into the cell by itself, okay? It requires insulin to, let's say, unlock the door so that sugar can get into the cell. Insulin is something we all have. It's made by the pancreas, which is an organ in our abdomen. And when you ingest food, the sugar, the body breaks it down into glucose and other things. And the glucose is in the bloodstream, and the body gets the memo that it needs to go from the bloodstream into all of the cells. So the body releases insulin, again, the key to unlock the door so that sugar can get into the cells. Now, over a long period of time, when we are eating a lot of sugar, the pancreas then has to release a lot of insulin. The cells get very tired, essentially, of continually opening the door, and getting all of this sugar in. So they start to develop what's called insulin resistance. So now the key that used to open the door to let the sugar in, now that key doesn't open the door. We have to jangle it. We have to release more. The pancreas starts to release more and more insulin to get the cells to let the sugar in. And while all this is going on, these blood sugar levels rise. Now, blood sugar is just like table sugar in the fact that it is granular. So you can think about little crystals of sugar moving around in your bloodstream and how kind of sharp they are. You can see how it would damage, if there's too much, it would damage the blood vessels, particularly the very small blood vessels. And where do we find those? In supplying blood to the nerves in our feet, in our kidneys, up in the brain, around the heart, all of these areas that you see get affected by uncontrolled diabetes. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense about diabetes, and why blood sugars are an issue, and how those complications can arise. Now, pre-diabetes, if you've had it or you know a loved one who does, please send this video to them, and to hopefully they can understand a little bit more why it's such a big deal, because unfortunately it does tend to kind of get brushed off. It doesn't have any symptoms. So people are like, oh, okay, I got some bad numbers in my blood work, but I feel fine, and just kind of go about their day to day. But the interesting thing about prediabetes is if you catch it and make those lifestyle changes now, you can get it under control and get yourself out of that pre-diabetic state and back into normal functioning before the damage occurs. Once the damage is done, there are things that can heal in the body. With this blood vessel damage, once the damage is done, it's done. And I hate to see it's so many people. Like I said, 1 in 3 Americans is pre-diabetic right now. And if they don't do something about it, it is going to develop into full-blown diabetes. They're going to have a stroke, lose toes, not be able to feel things, end up on dialysis. You got to go to dialysis 3 days a week, like 4 or 5 hours out of whack. I mean, it's just the complications from diabetes are the laundry list is so long. It sends people into the hospital at alarming rates. And if you're a pre-diabetic, you can absolutely very easily get yourself off of that path. So what does that look like? If you're a smoker, now's the time to stop. Diabetes and smoking do not mix, and the smoking significantly escalates any of the diabetic damage. Unfortunately, most people who have pre-diabetes are also carry extra weight. Those things tend to go together. So looking at your diet and your weight and working with your physician to get those things under control. A really good rule of thumb is bringing it back to basics on food. And what do I mean by that? We live in a world where our food has become incredibly engineered. If it comes out of a box, it's not food, okay? That is a food-like product. So taking it back to whole foods, things that exist in nature and come out of the ground, fruits, vegetables, lean meats and proteins, whole grains, that sort of thing. That means cooking at home and being very selective if you're having food on the go. You should aim to keep at least 80% of your dietary intake, those whole food sources, and aim to have processed food or anything that comes out of a package as less than 20% of your diet. Beyond that, any specific recommendations, you should reach out to your physician or a registered dietitian. But those are just some good rules of thumb to kind of get you moving in the right direction. Other health conditions that are associated with diabetes or pre-diabetes would also be high blood pressure and cholesterol. If you have those things, make sure you're taking your medications and talking to your doctor about, again, what other kind of lifestyle choices can help to get that under control. And we also see that activity plays a huge role in pre-diabetes and whether or not somebody becomes a full-blown diabetic or can revert their metabolism back to a normal state. So if you are not currently getting 30 minutes of activity 5 days a week, now is the time. Prediabetes should absolutely be a huge alarm bells and wake up call for anybody who gets that diagnosis. And unfortunately, I think probably because it comes with no symptoms and it just looks like a bad number on the lab report, I don't think it's taken as seriously as it should be. But I've seen so much, frankly, death and dismemberment and huge loss of quality of life before that comes from diabetes that I wish everybody could get this message. So please, my ask of you today, if you've listened this far, if you know somebody with pre-diabetes, or you know somebody who maybe fits that description and could be one of the 1 in 3 Americans who is eating processed food and carrying a bit of extra weight and or smoking on medications for other things like blood pressure and cholesterol, or eating a diet high in processed foods, please share this with them and share the message to them that, if I always say, if I didn't care, I wouldn't talk to you about it. I would let you go and do your thing. But, I don't want people to end up on that path with diabetes and especially, the complications that come with it, being poorly managed. And it can be difficult to manage. It is a whole lifestyle overhaul. So I encourage you, before it gets to that point, let's make these positive health changes and take care of your body. People say, oh, well, I've got to die anyways. But believe me, it's not the way to go. And you lose so much quality of life before it takes you to death. So I want to see you have that quality of life. I want to see you live your life to the fullest. If this is something you feel like you need help with, please reach out. I do work with people in short amounts of time to try to get you on the right track if that's something that would be helpful for you. You can find me at www.herdforlife.com. That's HEARDLIFE. I skipped. HEARDLIFE.com. FORLIFE.com, or find me on any of the social media platforms. And as always, if you have a topic request, you can go to the same place and let me know. So I hope this was helpful for you. Please share this with somebody. That's my biggest ask today. Please share this with somebody, because there's 1 in 3 Americans is pre-diabetic. So I know you know somebody. Thank you for listening, and see you next week.